Story 1. I was once canoeing the boundary waters between Minnesota and Canada. These aren't your normal backyard ponds. The boundary waters are thousands of enormous lakes interconnected with each other. Think many Great Lakes. We've been canoeing and camping along the lakes for about a week at this point. We didn't really have an itinerary, just planned a boat in camp, fish, and live off the land for 2 weeks. We had a GPS and sat phone to call a helicopter for pickup whenever we were done. Anyway, about a weekend, and we were set to canoe for a few hours to the next lake, an hour or so in, and we're in the center of an extremely long and narrow lake. Unfortunately, a storm started to blow in, and the waves on the lake swelled to 2+ feet, too much for our dinky canoes. We pull off to a random clearing on the shore and set up camp in a rush to avoid being totally thrashed by a rainstorm. We just set up camp and hunker down for the night. By the next morning, it had cleared up. We started walking up the coast of the lake, about 200 feet from our camp, looking for a good fishing spot. What we actually found was another campsite. However, it was absolutely wrecked, trash strewn everywhere, tent collapsed, and torn clothes on the ground. At first we were just like disgusted. What understar did this or left their stuff out to be barefoot? The more we looked around, though, the weirder things seemed. For one, their garbage was still hoisted into a tree to keep it safe from bears, but the whole bag was ripped open despite it being 30 feet in the air. Second, literally everything except the canoes was still at the campsite. Clothes, packs, food, rope, pans, like a serious set of hiking equipment enough for 2 or 3 people. Half of it was trashed and torn open. Mostly the pack's tent and clothes. The other half was totally untouched but thrown on the ground like somebody knocked the hell out of there, and nothing but their long johns, ditching hundreds of dollars of gear in the process. We waited a couple of hours and eventually called it back to our helicopter crew, but they hadn't been aware of anybody else or gotten any distress calls. We eventually just left everything and moved camp. Everybody was pretty upset by it, and a day or two later we ended the whole trip early because it seemed like nobody wanted to be out there anymore. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. First thought was a bear attack, but there was food left uneaten, and I've seen bear attacks on camps before, but nothing like this. Bears rip open packs and go after food and are generally pretty easy to scare away. What still sticks with me is why all their clothes and packs were still there, with half being totally destroyed and the other half being untouched. I still don't get it. I've done a lot of other camping and hiking, rafting and biking all around the country, and I've never had any other weird experiences like that. Story 2. I experienced my creepy middle of nowhere story while driving a bus in the desert of Central Australia. I was over 500 kilometers from the nearest town, so yeah, middle of nowhere stuff. I was out on a 5-day charter to pick up a bunch of Aboriginal elder women to go and get their women's business health checks done. On the day, we went via a place called Mintabi so they could show up in the clothing store at whatever store that's randomly in this little opal mining area of South Australia. We left from there quite late to make the 3 or so hour journey back to where we were all staying overnight. The next day, I take them back to their respective desert communities. The passengers all fell asleep as it had a very long day. Even the nurse who was traveling with us fell asleep, so there's me all alone in the cab of the Mercedes truck derived boss. My 30 passengers all sleeping in the darkness of the passenger pod behind the cab. And it was around 9 p.m. Up ahead in the distance, well, I see a headlight coming towards me along the lonely desert dirt road, so I did my lights so the spotlights go off and adjust to see only what low beam will show me. I drive down into a slight dip of a dry creek bed, expecting to see the car with only one headlight any time shortly. It's nothing unusual to see a car with only one headlight out there, so I'm not even remotely bothered. As I come out of the dip, I put my spotlights and high beams back on, and there is no core, no nothing, just the empty dirt road. There's no dust in the air, and I can see a good distance in front of me and out to each side. There was nothing there, just the empty desert, the dirt road, and me alone in the cab. I keep the lights on until we come to a stop about an hour later. I didn't see any cars or anything the rest of the journey. Before I let the passengers out, I ask any of them if they saw the light, and they all go dead silent, and after a short while they start talking in their own language hurriedly, and then they all get off the bus. A few minutes later, a couple of ladies come up to me and asked me to tell them exactly what I saw without leaving anything out, and to describe exactly where I saw it. Now, I'm a big guy. I lived on 3 continents. I've been a police officer, a teacher, Boston coach driver, truck driver, all sorts of things. Let's just say that I'm pretty skeptical. But I do have an open mind. I'm not scared by much in this world. After I told the ladies everything from start to finish and describing my new detail exactly where it happened, the two ladies looked at me with their eyes wide. They looked spooked and they said, and I'll never forget the way they said it, "Driver, we're so lucky that you did not stop, because if you did, no one would have ever seen us ever again. We'd all be gone." I asked why, and they just shook their heads and said not to talk about it because it had scared all the ladies. I'm sure many people have heard about the Minman lights in Western Queensland. Whatever these ladies knew about whatever I saw in our location, they were convinced that it wasn't something you wanted to meet in a desert at night. I only ever saw this once. I only saw it for maybe a minute, and it just looked like a car headlight a couple of kilometers away up the road. But I'll tell you what, if the ladies that come from this area and whose people have survived in this desolate, remote part of the continent for 60,000 years, or worried to the point of all being scared, I certainly don't want to mess with whatever it is. Story 3. My cousin is with the Forest Service in the Montana-Wyoming area, and I decided to go up there with her to literally test the waters. She does hydrology and has to ride out to the middle of nowhere to test streams and snow runoff to ensure no contaminants. So I thought that sounded fun and wanted to do a bit of a tour with her. We were going to have to camp out there for 2 nights, so we packed up all of our gear in saddlebags and started out. The first day and night was amazing, beautiful scenery and amazing air quality. It really is so peaceful out there. I love that area and wish I got to go up there more often. Anyway, we started out on the second day, and my cousin said, "You want to see something weird?" And of course I said yes. So she led me to a bit of a side journey into this tiny little ravine. We ended up traveling 2 hours away from our actual path. We laid out at the very end of this fold in the land. She dismounts and tells me to get off my horse too. We tie them up in this gorgeous little clearing, and she tells me to follow this tiny wildlife path and to bring our little rechargeable radio. It's one of those you can plug in or wind up, and it also acts as a lantern if you really need it to, but that kills the batteries quickly. I do, and out in the middle of nowhere, there's a huge coil of wire sticking out of the ground. The wire itself was not weirdly large, like some very transmission wire, but small, like 10 or 12 gauge wiring for a house. They trailed off into the brush and trees, so naturally I decided to follow the damn thing out of curiosity. My cousin trails behind me as I do, and this wire, after coming straight up from the ground, it is strung across the limbs of trees, then back to the ground, and it snakes around rocks and finally deadens into an outlet. That outlet is mounted on the side of a desk. It looks like a school teacher's desk from when I was growing up, with a metal base and a pseudo-wood plastic top thing. No chair, no building, no nothing, just this outlet and this desk. I'm staring confused as hell at this desk in the middle of the forest when my cousin takes the radio, pulls out the cord and box it into the outlet. It lit up and started blaring static. The wire was being fed from somewhere. Now the place where we were had no road access, no buildings for many miles, and no other people around, and yet there was a live outlet. Weird. Story 4. I live in Kansas and have driven that west stretch many times on my way to Colorado. It's absolutely nothing for so long, and a few tiny towns you do pass are mostly run-down nothings as well. I've never had to drive it in the dark, but I would easily get spooked, and for whatever reason we seem to have a lot of people in this stupid state that like to mess with you late at night on the interstate if you're the only 2 cars around. 3 significant times I remember where one of those would pass me slow down in front of me until I had to pass them for them to then speed back up, stay beside me for long, get back in front of me, and repeat until we came across another car and they started on them while I fly forward to get away. I had someone once follow me into a tone line where several others were open and empty. I had a K-tag and the worker waved me through, but I stopped and told her the vehicle behind me had been following me for miles and miles, how they were passing and slowing down and now followed me into this lane. She told me they didn't have a K-tag, so she would make sure to take her time in getting their money to give me time to get ahead. Well, they then come back up and go into another lane. She tells me to sit and wait for them to drive on, and turned on the red X so no other cars would come behind me. The other car waited about 2 minutes just sitting there. The lady called the other worker in the stand and told them to get them out because they've been following me, and They were being really sketchy. They finally pulled off and drove slowly. Down the highway, I sat at her toll for about 5 more minutes. I got off on the very first exit and went through town to get to a road that led to my home a few miles outside of town, because I was afraid that car may have pulled over on the highway ahead to wait. For me, this was about 2 in the morning. Also, people who do that, extremely creepy and unsettling. Story 5. I used to deliver hotshot freight across the Great Plains, Minnesota area. One night around 2 a.m., I was hauling across North Dakota trying to reach Montana by morning. I was delivering a particularly valuable tractor part that a farm desperately needed for the following day. I began to notice some highway hypnosis sneaking up on me, but it didn't really bother me because I'd been through it 100 times before. Anyone who's driven across North Dakota knows that it's incredibly flat-like. Really flat. There also tends to be very strict and long roads. It's somewhat easy to see things on the road that are far away. Even at night, I noticed something large on the road, spanning my entire lane, approximately half a mile in front of me. I slowed down a bit and prepared to move in the opposite lane, thinking it was some retread off a blown tire. As I got closer, and I noticed it was 2 people laying head to toe across the entire lane, and I swerved into the other lane, successfully avoiding them, and came to an almost complete stop, but they didn't move not an inch. I was just about to back up and check on them when I remembered a story that an old gray-beard colleague of mine told me. He told me that in certain remote areas, people will lie down in the middle of the road and wait for a car or truck to stop and see what's going on, and at that point the road layers along with whoever else is hiding in the nearby bushes will beat the __ out of the driver and steal his vehicle, leaving him in the middle of nowhere. And I decided not to back up, and when the 2 people in the road saw me put my truck back in gear and drive away, they both got up and walked toward the shoulder. I called the police and explained what had happened. We were so far away from civilization that I doubt anything came of it. Thanks to that old gray beard, I got to keep my truck, my job, and my teeth. Story 6. I was driving on a cross-country road trip through the middle of nowhere, Kansas, when one of my tires blew out. I pulled over and went to call AAA, but I had no service on my phone. So I got out and started the process of trying to change the tire myself. After a very short while, a cop pulled up and asked if I needed help, and I said, "Yes, thank you, officer." And he said, "'Cause you're in luck. It just so happens I know the best tow truck driver. He could take you into town and get you all fixed up, no problem." The mosquitoes were eating me alive. I only had a donut-style replacement tire and no clue how to properly change it, so I said, "Yes, please." And the officer gave the tow truck a call. After another short while, the tow truck arrived, and the officer laughed. The driver asked, "Where am I telling you to?" So I said, "I'm not sure, to town, I guess somewhere where I can get my tire fixed." He said, "Well, you're in luck, 'cause I know the guy at the only place that's open right now who can fix that for you." I said, "Okay, sounds good," and he told us to the auto repair place. This was basically a ghost town, if you could even call it a towel. The tow truck driver and the repair guy sat around and bullshitted for a couple of hours while my tire was being fixed. Bear in mind, there was nobody else there but me and my passengers. There was nobody else anywhere within sight. The town was empty except for the gas station connected to the repair place. Finally they came out and said I was all set and gave me both my bills, $1,200 in total for one tire and a 5-mile tow for a 1991 Grand AM that wasn't even worth that much. I was furious but had no options, so I gave him my credit card and he said, "Sorry guy, we're a cash only kind of tell." I said, "Okay then." "Well, I don't have any cash on me, so how are we gonna settle this up?" "Well, you're in luck because there's an ATM next door at the gas station my buddy owns," he said. So I went to the gas station and took out the maximum I could on 4 different cards, each with a $20 withdrawal fee. I looked behind the counter and in addition to the gas station attendant, there stood the car, the tow truck driver, and the repair guy, all munching on Doritos and having a good laugh. I'm pretty sure I got hosed and potentially maybe even sabotaged. Looking back, that cop sure arrived really quickly, and my other 3 tires were all still relatively new. I had to cut my trip short and invest in cortisone cream for the million mosquito bites. Story 7. So back when I was younger, I was kind of a terrible kid to deal with, being totally unmanageable as well as being a child of 2 narcissists. The decision was made that I would work on a huge ranch deep into the sticks of Arizona, there were some actually really good things to come of this, but I digress. On cattle drives, it was not unusual to stumble upon horses encampments and even whole towns also in the middle of nowhere. These all had their own movie-like situations that came out of them, but one in particular I will never forget. Here we are on another cattle drive, this time pretty far into it. We've been out in the desert, if I remember correctly, easily 3 or more weeks when we stumble upon this town in the middle of the canyon that is picture perfect, and in addition there's a diner. It's like an old, totally chromed out East Coast diner. We had not eaten anything of real substance for a while, and the head wrangler promised me a milkshake for my birthday, and I was beyond stoked, if not a little weirded out. But honestly, after you spend enough time in the wilderness of the U.S., nothing really surprises me, so we leave behind some of our mates to watch the cattle who are resting in the shade after getting over this rocky wash, and to hike into the canyon to go to the diner. The second we set foot in the diner, the head guy, this older cowboy who's the head of all of us, grabs my arm. This place is packed, and everyone is wearing odd clothing like stuff from maybe the 40s or 50s. My head wrangler is a really tough guy who's been ranching for his entire life, and he's definitely seen some stuff. T grabs my arm when I realize everyone is just staring at us, and there's a really strange feeling in the air now. We were used to getting looks all the time from being smelly and dirty, but these people looked almost in fear and shock. T and two others with us slowly back out of the diner, dragging me in tow, and we immediately go back to our site and leave without a word. I was so confused, I just went along with all of that. To this day, I have no idea what that place was, or if we stumbled through a time warp or what, but my wrangler told me later that night when we were away from them, and he felt like we stepped back in time, like truly stepped back in time. And that place was stuck in some sort of loop, and if we stayed we would get stuck. Tu never really spoke a lot, nor was he to be mastered with. He also had a mean sweet tooth despite having almost no teeth, so for him to have reacted that way really shook me. I have no idea if what he told me was true, but I will never forget the look of all those people and that immaculate diner. Story 8. I'm an airline pilot, and I have 2 stories to share in the air. Probably the creepiest thing I've heard was the distress call of a small general aviation aircraft going down. This was around 2014 in the Pacific Northwest. He'd just blown a cylinder head and oil was shooting out all over his windshield. You could hear the panic in his voice as he radioed out that he couldn't see and was trying to report his position to a few airliners so they could relay it to ATC. Let me check the news that night, and he actually died in the crash. It was a pretty eerie feeling that we'd heard the last words of a pilot fighting for his life while we were just cruising along above the clouds at 35,000 feet, completely powerless to do anything other than to reach out to him over the radio. For my second story, one of the creepiest destinations I've flown to was Ciudad Juarez. 1,000,002 flight attendants were born on an El Paso layover, so we decided to get drinks around 11 p.m. We drank until the bars closed at 2, and on the way out we asked the bartender if anything else was still open. Not unless you want to go to see it out of Juarez, he joked. I looked at the flight attendants. We shrunk, nodded, and said okay. He was shocked that we took him seriously. We walked a short distance back to the hotel, grabbed our passports, and set out for Mexico. Before we left, I asked the flight attendants, who were both women, if they were sure they were okay with this. Yeah, sure, as long as you're coming too. Liquid courage had finally overruled any fears of being kidnapped or beheaded. And off we went. So we walked 20 minutes south to the border. El Paso was completely dead quiet. Aside from a few homeless people, some of them were stumbling around and clearly under the influence of drugs, but none of them bothered us. We reached the Mexican border, and the guards took an extra second to look at the 3 crazy gringos before waving us through. It was close to 3 a.m. at this point, and we were 3 20-somethings wandering around the streets of Ciudad Juarez at night. I'm not sure how much you know about this place, but it isn't exactly safe at night, especially for non-locals. The streets were pretty empty, and not a single bar was open, but everyone we passed stopped mid-conversation and stared at us as we walked by. The flight attendants were getting nervous, and they were walking so close to me that we were brushing up against each other. After determining that everything within realistic distance of the border was closed, we turned around to head back to the Ud, as we'd probably been in Seared at Juarez for around an hour, and somehow managed to navigate down the dark and deserted streets onto the same strip that we Entered on by this point, we were close enough to the border that there were a few street lights that were still on. All of a sudden, two locals stumbled out from the dark sidewalks into the street which we were walking down the middle of. As they came into the light, all three of us jumped at what we saw: a man and a woman, both with scarred faces, hunched backs, excessive sweat, ripped clothing, and missing teeth, or grinning as they approached us. The man was half speaking Spanish, half laughing. The startle factor of their approach, combined with their appearance, stands out as one of the biggest jump scares of my life. After realizing they weren't trying to kill us yet, I figured, screw it, we'd come this far, why not throw a Hail Mary? To my own disbelief, I actually tried to communicate with the man and asked if he knew of any bars that were open. By this point, the flight attendants were so terrified that each one latched themselves onto one of my arms. In any situation other than the one we were currently in, I'd have looked pretty cool. The man simply smiled, pointed behind him, and said, "Over there." There was a motel with the lights turned off except for a steady red light on the front balcony and a light flickering from inside a room on the second floor. One of the flight attendants turned and said into my ear, "No. No, we need to leave now." I thanked the man and woman for their time, and we hightailed it to the U.S. border. They gave us a thorough questioning, and rightfully so, as one man and two women crossing into the U.S. at around 4 a.m. reeks of human trafficking. Weirdly, the number of people huddled on the streets of El Paso had doubled, and we walked back to our hotel. That layover definitely takes the cake for creepiest thing to happen in the middle of nowhere. Story 9. I'm a biologist that has to do field work surveying unmaintained private properties in the middle of nowhere. Long story short, we find a body face up in a stream deep in a thickly wooded wetland. The body looked several months old, at least. No clothes, no tools, no shelter. Nothing nearby to suggest who he is or how he got there. We couldn't even tell race or gender from what we saw. We called the police, and they immediately tell us it's probably the missing person who ditched his car nearby. They apparently searched for weeks with dogs, horses, and ATVs, but didn't find any sign of the guy. All they found was his family car loaded with cash and a handgun. They also tell us he seemed to be running from someone or something, real or imagined. They weren't sure. Apparently, the man didn't even close this car door, just ditched it at the rail crossing and took off running into the woods in a tremendous hurry. I find his clothes about 30 yards up the stream back from where the body was found. His pants were neatly folded and placed on top of his nice brown loafers, underpants, and socks on top of those. He placed his glasses atop his socks, very orderly and in a nice pile. His shirt and undershirt were hanging from a tree branch right above those, as if to dry. Attorney, the whole thing creeps me out even a year on, but what unsettles me is the fact that he ran from his family, drove several hours from his home, ditched his car, and fought a mile through briars and thick woods, or only to stop and carefully fold and hang his clothes before meeting his aunt. I look him up every now and then and still can't find any more information about what happened or why. Story 10. Trucker here. I think the best creepy thing that has ever happened to me was when I was heading from Tucson, Arizona, up into Salt Lake City, Utah. Well, this was a few years ago, and the main highway had been taken out in a flash flood. It was under construction, so I had to take a weird detour through the mountains in lower Utah. It was getting late, and I was getting tired, so I pulled off onto the shoulder and went to sleep in my bunk. Now, this was in the middle of nowhere. The closest town was like 40 miles away, so it's completely pitch black outside. Once I turned the lights off, anyway, around 4 a.m., I wake up because I'm hearing something messing with my trunk. It's like playing with the air and power cables between my cab and the trailer, which is literally 6 inches from where my head is at, but on the outside of the cab. Then I feel something climb onto the landing that's on the back of my truck, and it shakes my whole truck, so I'm guessing something around 200 to 300 pounds was climbing around back there. I'm thinking like a mountain lion or a bear. At this point, I'm widely awake, and I want to get this thing away from me, so I slam my hand into my cap wall, trying to scare whatever is out there. I slam hard enough to really make it loud. I then hear someone, a male, scream bloody murder. I hear them fall off the back of my truck. I then hear about 15 other people all around my truck yelling. I climb up front, turn on my lights, and illuminate a squad of Army reserves doing their midnight rock march and capture drills. Turns out these guys were supposed to find an abandoned truck and secure it for their midnight trails. That truck was 3 miles back down the road. They were not expecting me to be sleeping there and thought I was part of the drill. I'm ex-military, so after explaining I was not part of their test and legit was just out there out of coincidence, we laughed it off. They had to radio their CO and tell them I was there and not have the other squads bother me. Story 11. I'm not necessarily a trucker, but I'm a commercial delivery driver in a rural area in the Midwestern Utes. Randomly, one day as I'm leaving our home store, the radio just stopped working in the store. We thought nothing of it, and I left to start the day, and they just turned off the radio in the store and continued their day. I start the car, and boom, the radio wasn't working. It wasn't working in every single station, so I thought that was weird and decided to go back into the store and ask them to see if it was that way on their radio. Same thing, I go out to my personal car, no radio. I call my fiancé and best friend, who are on the complete opposite side of the country where it's not rural, no radio. I call my mom, nothing on her end. Everyone I worked with called surrounding stores and customers, and they had nothing. Was a weird blackout. So I finally ended up leaving for the day's deliveries. I left the radio on in the background. Even though it was static, just for some sort of noise, volume was really low, but out of nowhere a faint talking can be heard, and it was going in and out. It was a language I didn't recognize at all, and I honestly don't even know what to compare it to. It sounded like a female computerized voice, oddly, though my source radio carded as well. As they later told me, they heard it too. After that, it was static again for a few hours, and then slowly one by one stations came back up. Now this is so easy to probably have an explanation to, but the weirdest thing about it was that there was no media attention to it, and no radio station mentioned anything about the hours-long blackout, and it was like it never happened. What freaks me out about this was the complete silence about it, and how no one was given an explanation. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have a scary story of your own to share and you would like me to feature it on the channel, please send it to the email in the description, or if you prefer, head over to my subreddit r/stories from Mr. Revenant. It's the stories that keep the channel going. Thank you all for listening, and thank you to my channel members and patrons: V. Barry, LJ, Fiona, X. Fox Scott, I Like Booty, Monica Level, Ace Chris, and Donna Holly Spry, Kimber, Jasmine, Cyanotics, Heather, Haven, Kitty, Cat, Luna 2, ADHD, Aurora, Janice, Cinderella, Baby, Borderline, Betty Lady, Drackard, Erica, Nicole, Snowball, Ruthina, Melanie, The Honeybee 987, Pretty Girl 215, Ryan, Brooke, Wendy, Crafty Cow, Tina, Dina, Vampy, Dabs, Patricia, Amber, Krista, Brenda, Absent, Alice, Christy K, Spider's Web, Ulan, La Andrea, Sue, Monique, Sean Gorman, Emma, Lisa, Sigma, Cubax, Greg, Chelsea, Amanda, Jane, Sam, Tappy, Sarah C, Austin, Tegan, Lil Smart, Jenny, Gabrielle, Fire 05, Sarah P, James, Gargano, Gemma, Alan, and Alex. I hope you're all doing well, guys. I'll see you all on the next one.